Everyone, I'm Ruth. I don't look very much like the games guru from King. I'm sorry about that. And I'm actually here to tell a very different story. I'm a big fan of King and all the major players in that space, but we all know that they tend to spend quite a lot of money to make the money that they've earned through their app stores. So today I want to talk a little bit about Swiftkey and how we've kind of done it from a more startup-y perspective, particularly using the example of Swiftkey Note, which is our first iPhone and iPad product that we launched just under a month ago. It's free on the App Store if you have good enough Wi-Fi to try it out now. And we did that without spending any money on user acquisition or advertising, but we still had very high hopes for where we wanted it to place in the App Store. So before I start, I want to say I don't have anything against ads or user acquisition spend, and I'm sure that both of those are going to be a big part of our future as we scale to having many millions more users. You'd be hard-pressed to find many apps in the top 10 that are not using some of these tools to increase their visibility. But we come from a startup perspective where you don't spend cash that you don't need to spend. You plow that back into the development process, and we also quite like a bit of a challenge, to be honest. So for a bit of context, how many people here have the Swiftkey keyboard on their phone? Cool, so you kind of know what I'm talking about. So we're best known for our Android product, which guesses your next word. So it's using artificial intelligence to learn from you all the time to accurately predict what you're going to say next, and also mean you don't have any of those damn you autocorrect moments. So that also meant that we were completely associated with Android, which we love. We love our Android users. That's our kind of bread and butter. That's the community we've grown up in. But when it came to launching an iOS product, we were then kind of concerned that no one would hear us or care. We were completely unknown on that platform. And for the last few years, if I've met people at events like this, I can tell immediately when I say, have you heard of Swiftkey? And they say, yes, they're an Android user. And if they say no, they're almost always an iPhone user. So we were completely invisible. And we wanted to launch Swiftkey Note, which is this light note-taking application that syncs with Evernote. Super cool, has all of the next word prediction you'd expect from Swiftkey, but a totally new concept to iPhone and iPad users who are not in the business of having next word prediction on what they're using. And there was also an element of scrutiny for us because a lot of people asked us all the time, when are you going to come to Apple? And that's because Apple don't let, as I'm sure you know, third-party keyboards sell on their App Store. So we couldn't build the product that we built on Android and just insert it on Apple devices. We wouldn't be allowed in the App Store, and it wouldn't work. So there was always a lot of scrutiny, which meant we had the added fun of trying to recruit iOS developers secretly without mentioning the word iOS, which if you ever want a good challenge for your business, I'd recommend that one. There we go. But we also have very high ambitions for ourselves. So we're the #1 best-selling paid app in Android for 2013 and 2012 globally, again, using this very low-cost model. But we wanted to get great results with our iPhone and iPad product, but again, without such a big sort of marketing and communication spend. So what were the results? So we launched this on the last day of January, and within a couple of days, we'd gone to #10 in the free charts in the United States, which is our target market. We'd also gone to #1 in the productivity charts around the world in about 45 countries. Apple made the app its editor's choice, and we got the front page featuring slot in a range of countries from the United States to the UK. So we're pretty pleased with that. We also got some great press. Here's some examples of the kind of language people are using. Magical, 5 stars. So by all accounts, we did what we set out to do. So what I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 15 minutes is about how we did that and the elements of the strategy that could be replicated across lots of different types of businesses. So point #1. There we go. The product. Excuse the PowerPoint edge that says great. There's no getting away from the fact that your product has to be great. And however many people you see trying to make shortcuts on that, it doesn't work. And I come from this from a communications perspective, and my job is all of the rest of the steps, which are kind of my end of the equation, are not possible to do successfully if the base product isn't great. We're a technology company. We build great technology. The second step is to really think about the App Store. That is your shop window on the world. That's how millions of people are going to come into contact just browsing very quickly through, and you have those seconds to grab them. And each App Store has completely different rules, procedures, and best practice. So that's kind of number 2. The relationships piece, this is the kind of invisible bit. This is coming to events like this. This is like building your network, and hopefully one day sitting next to the guy at dinner who ends up being the guy that is in charge of Apple featuring or whatever your equivalent is. And that's a really important part. Those editor's choice picks on the front of the App Store don't happen by accident, and they don't happen if Apple or Google Play don't know who you are and what you're doing. So you have to build those relationships before you're ready to launch. The media element and letting people get their hands on your product earlier. And the social side, or more broadly, the community. We can't underplay how important the community for Swiftkey has been. And if you want to do a low spend but high impact launch, you're going to need as many advocates out there talking about your product and explaining it for you. And lastly, the team that you assemble is one of the fundamental building blocks. You can't do a great strategy unless you've got great people and they're in the right roles. Whoa, I've had some PowerPoint issues. That says product. So the important thing, as I said, is Swiftkey is a dev-led company. It's all about the artificial intelligence, the natural language processing, and the machine learning. That comes first. And that has to be true of any launch that we do. So you make the product right first and foremost. And if that takes a little while, fine. So we've been out in the app space since 2010. That's when we launched our Android app. It actually took us to the beginning of this year to launch our iOS product. And that was because we wanted to wait until we had a really solid idea that we were really excited about, that we knew we could execute, and that actually had a user benefit for people. We knew we couldn't come and make the direct equivalent of our Android keyboard on iOS for the reasons I said about the UI lockdown from Apple. So we wanted to make something that was actually useful. And that's when Swiftkey Note evolved, and the added twist of going into a partnership with Evernote. So if you use Swiftkey Note, everything you write can be synced easily into your Evernote account, and also Swiftkey can learn your language from your archives so that it understands what words and phrases matter to you. But that also gave us a great use case and a great compelling story to come out and talk to people about, because many millions of people use Evernote, and it gave the product that much more depth for it. But product comes first. You can't do a good launch if the product underneath is not going to live up to your expectation. So the App Store. You have such little time to attract the attention of people who are going to see your product. And I think the screenshots and the images that you have the availability to use in the App Store are the most underestimated thing. That is your biggest asset. People don't tend to read all the way down the text. They'll read the top couple of lines, and then they'll immediately be seeing the pictures. So we spent a lot of time crafting the message on that. We wanted to tell a story and go through the feature set in a way that made sense to people. And we spent so much more time on this than I think people on the outside would think, crafting the features that we highlighted to make sure that we were making a compelling case. And I think you see a lot of products where screenshots is taken very literally as, I've just taken a screenshot of it and put it up there. And there's so much more you can do with that space. But I've also put read the manual, because it was a big lesson for us coming from Google Play, where we kind of understood how that storefront works. You can change it anytime you like. It's really video-led. And then suddenly you come to iOS, totally different rules, and a lot of rules, as I'm sure many of you in that space know. Not so video-led, not so flexible. You have to get it right the first time you put it up. And if you have poor screenshots or a mistake in there and you put your launch out, you're not going to get the impact that you want, and you may not be able to edit some of these features until you put out a new product update, which can be, a long time to have something embarrassing in your kind of shop window. So that relationships piece. So there's 3 examples that really mattered for us in Swiftkey Note, but I think that the same principles apply beyond that. So first and foremost, it was about our relationship with Apple. Again, we're known as an Android company. We went out very early in the process of building Swiftkey Note to speak to people at Apple, to talk to them, show them what we were doing, so that they could find out and be supportive of it. And we gave them very early access to demoing the product, and we got some really great feedback from that. And then when the product took great shape, it became a natural conversation to talk about featuring and launch dates and how they would be supportive of that product, because we'd demonstrated that we'd made something really classy that fitted with their rules. And I think that links back to the App Store point. Apple have a lot of instructions for how they want you to do it, how they want you to reference their products. And if you play by their rules and you show that you're as perfectionist about your product as they are about their brand, then you can get into that kind of conversation about being a product that they want to feature on the front page and that's good enough to earn its place there. We also partnered with Evernote for Swiftkey Note by using their API. But again, we took it a step further than that. We reached out to them. We sat down face-to-face where we could with Evernote people. We gave them access to early betas of the product so that they could use it. We listened to their feedback. These guys have their hands on hundreds of apps each year that use their API. No one knows better than they do what works, what details are essential, and what makes for a superior product. And so we listened to that feedback and we adjusted accordingly. And then again, when it came to launch, they initiated doing some co-marketing with us where they put out blogs and social media posts about us. And if you think about how that amplified our reach, we're a small British company and suddenly we have Evernote tweeting about us and blogging about us. We were able to reach many millions of more potential users than we could have done alone. And that would have been very costly if we did that through advertising. And my last point on relationships is about the influencers, the people in your industry that can actually move the market and make people listen. So we at Swiftkey are very lucky to have built a friendship with Stephen Fry, who's very well known in the UK, but I know may not be as well known outside. But he is an actor and a writer and a technology evangelist, and he has a very, very large Twitter account of 6.5 million people. So again, we'd met Stephen before. He'd been really supportive of our Android product. We sent him a sign-up access for our unreleased product. And then we get this wonderful surprise on launch day in the form of this tweet. And you really have to prepare yourself and your IT team if he's going to tweet about your product, because we'd already had 2 times the normal traffic with our existing PR, and that shot it 8 times higher. So the servers took a bit of a beating, but it was so amazing to reach that many people. And again, those conversations have to happen early. If you want a big bang launch, you have to get everything ready for the day that you unveil, because if you stagger it, it's not going to give you the velocity in the charts that you're after. So on to the media. There's always a dilemma when it comes to launching and doing your media strategy. And one school of thought says, wait until you have everything perfect. Build the perfect product, write your press release, get all the images, tie it in a bow, and then present it to the journalists that you really admire. And this time we took a different strategy, a bit like we said about Apple and Evernote. We took it to them early. We sent about 12 or 15 key journalists that we knew and respected, again, early access of what was essentially an unfinished product. And that's a nerve-wracking thing to do. We felt it was in a great place, but there were always bugs and things. But we knew that quality tech journalism takes time. And we all hate it when people have this kind of copy and paste culture. And I used to be a journalist. But part of the reason there's a copy and paste culture is because people don't have enough time to fully get to grips with a product and understand the issues with it. So we went in early. We gave some people a month's worth of head start, and they all respected our embargo and our deadline. And we said, play with this and be honest and tell us what you think. And this gave us another key thing that was really valuable because it gave us their expert feedback. So again, you have an early warning system before it's out in the public from journalists saying this feature didn't work. Or one woman, a brilliant reporter from TechCrunch, used Swiftkey Note so extensively during that embargo period to do all of her note-taking. She discovered a bug for us that we wouldn't have found otherwise, which was if you reached a certain quantity of text, epic essays, it starts to get laggy. And that hadn't come up in our testing. So we learned something valuable there that we can put in bug fix updates. But the more time they have, the more beneficial the coverage is going to be. That's how you get 5 stars from CNET, not by giving them 10 minutes notice or 24 hours notice. But it's risky, and it comes back to that product point again, of if the product's great, this stage is going to be an asset to you. If the product underneath doesn't live up to the expectations, this is the stage when you're going to be found out. And then the community aspect. It's an obvious point. Everyone for the last few years, every time they've done a launch, social media has been part of their strategy. But I think that sometimes too much emphasis is put on that announcement message and crafting your broadcast and getting the the blog that's going to make your content really engaged and all of that jargon. And what gets forgotten is actually the sort of aftercare element of social media, and that's its real value for us in customer service. And we're still very human-centric when it comes to these things. It's still human beings sitting in front of a computer. There's no automated stuff. And when you have a launch coming up, it literally is a case of putting the human resources where you need it. So there's no one too senior in our team to spend their days doing social media after a launch. We had all hands on deck, taking all of the channels, answering people's questions. And this is a cost point as well, because you're not going to be able to answer 100% of the questions on the internet about your product, especially if you want it to be a success. So you need advocates who can do that for you. And the more that you can spend those first few days educating people who reach out to you about your product and what it does, you've then just empowered that 100 people to go and explain that in the other Reddit forums that you haven't got to yet. And they go and do that storytelling on your behalf. And if you want to be low cost, that is absolutely essential, because you're just not going to be able to have the resources to reach them all yourselves. So I would spend we have full-time social media and community engagement anyway, but spend a couple of days after launch and answer every question you can. The more you get through, the better the understanding of your product will be in the community, and the more that they will represent you. So the team, this is actually a picture of the Swiftkey Frisbee team. We have a lot of sports teams. It sounds like a really obvious point that everyone says, but actually I think it matters a lot more than gets remembered sometimes. I think when you're building a company and growing at great speed, it can be very easy just to reach out to whoever's there. You kind of need a sort of bums on seats to do, say, the social media jobs that I'm mentioning. We've taken a different approach. We've scaled very fast. We've added 100 people in the last 2 years, so we went from 30 people to 130. But we really worked hard at that. We hired a technical recruitment team, and actually they had someone essentially came in-house and sat with us for 2 years, because they have to understand our culture. We don't just want the brightest, we want the brightest who will also be the kind of participating devs and product managers and all the rest of it that we need. That's part of our culture. But there's another step to this, which is that you don't just need the great people, you need them all doing the right job and knowing exactly where their responsibilities lie. Again, if you've got a small team, you don't have the resources to double up. You can't waste time doing things twice over. So when it comes to the comms and marketing teams, we divvied everything up very clearly. One person was in charge of that App Store question. One person was in charge of all of our creative work, from our videos to imagery to website text. One of us was in charge of those media relationships, and we knew exactly who was doing what. And it's a bit like conducting an orchestra, I think, or maybe at our scale more like a string quartet. You have to make sure that everyone's doing their separate parts, but it all happens at the same time. And that's where having that team, and not just having the great people, but having an amazing culture where you know what you're fighting for and you know what your aims are, becomes really important. And that says, it should say give yourself enough space, but it says give yourself enough time. Launches are not easy things to do. We thought we would probably launch several weeks earlier than we did, and we took our time at each stage with the product development, with getting all of that App Store collateral correct, and planning it all out, because you have one shot to try and propel yourselves up the top of the charts. And that's one of the other best ways of staying there. You need that visibility. And one of the things about startups is you're supposed to be sort of rough and ready about it, but also there's quite a high penalty to making mistakes. So you have to be kind of able to innovate and adapt on the fly, but also you need to have a strong plan. And if something's not good enough, it's not good enough and it doesn't go out. So I said there were 6 points, but I cheated a bit to add a last one, because however much you plan, it just doesn't always go the way you thought it would go. And that's one of the fun things about working in mobile and startups, the unexpected. This industry moves very fast. And so I don't want to give the impression that we planned it all out and sat down and it all executed perfectly, because it's not as simple as that. If it was as simple as that, we'd all be doing it all the time. There's always extra things that happen that throw you completely off course. And for me in this launch, it was this. It was suddenly in the middle of the day spotting a very prominent Twitter account called EV Leaks. And this guy is kind of watched by the industry because he's known for being on the money when he has a mobile leak, with one of the pictures that we'd created that literally only about 10 or 15 people in the world had seen. And to be honest, I still don't know how we got that. and I respect him for doing his job really well. But when you've planned a whole strategy around secrecy and a big bang, it's kind of, your heart goes into your stomach when you suddenly see half of it on the internet. And a few days later, he put up a subsequent image that had come from the same collateral. And it's really disappointing when something doesn't go to plan, because you've worked so hard for it. And we had so many journalists and things who'd been kind of in on the story the whole time, who'd respected our embargo. And that's really an opportunity where you have to kind of roll with it and try out a different strategy, or kind of keep calm and carry on. So one of the changes we made was all of our media strategy, we brought everything forward. So this picture came out a week before the leak, and we still hadn't told the vast majority of journalists. We'd only been talking to that select 15 who'd been doing the feedback with us. So I hit the phones, I called as many as I could, and I told them the truth. I said, yeah, the guy's right, and now you've got me on record saying that, but I'd really like you to wait one more week till we're ready, and then we'll give you all of the details, and you can have the time to write it, and we'll answer any questions you want. And every single one said yes, and they wanted to help us, by playing by the rules. And that was an amazing moment for us that links all of the others together. We'd built the relationships, we'd earned that. So it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, and it doesn't always go to plan, but that's part of the beauty of this space and why we all do what we do. But that's a little summary, really, of using Swiftkey Note as a kind of case study. And actually, I can say today that we've hit 1 million downloads for that app alone today using this strategy. And it was in the top 10s and things. So it's been a really special moment for us, particularly being so new to a platform. But this is also the same strategy that we've used on our Android side as well. So it applies to both. And we just really feel that there's a time and a place for investing real cash in advertising and user acquisition. But it can be very dispiriting when you're an early company, when people basically tell you it can't be done unless you spend all this money on stuff, invariably by paying for someone else's services. It took me kind of 6 months to get wise to the fact that people were telling me that I couldn't do it because they wanted to sell me something. So I wanted just to say it can be done. It still can be done. And I look forward to seeing what you guys are producing, and hopefully stand here next year and hear what you guys have done and got to #1 and beaten us to it. But I'll be around for a little bit longer. I don't know if there's an opportunity for questions now, or if you want to take it to Twitter. But thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you in Barcelona.
I thought we do have time for questions now, Ruth, so I thought that was great. And I've got a couple questions, and hopefully you guys do too. But my first one, so what was it, about 1.5 years ago that a couple of your guys moved to the Silicon Valley, moved to San Francisco. Was that part of the plan to get to know more Apple people then? We just thought they wanted to be closer to us and party with us a little more, didn't we?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, actually. So we're totally a British company. The founders met at university, they're mates. Our HQ is in the UK, that's where all of our devs are, all of our engineering. And then we decided just over a year ago to move out 3 key people from our team to the West Coast. So we moved the CEO, the Chief Marketing Officer, and the Chief Commercial Officer. And they're now fleshing out offices in San Francisco. So we've got kind of about 6 people out there. And that was a big moment for us. I think part of it is the relationship space. It wasn't specifically to befriend Apple or any specific target. But it's still unfortunate for us in the European space that some of those conversations are still happening in the Starbucks queue in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And so because the US is one of our biggest markets, we knew that we had to be there. And we've worked very hard, though, to make it a kind of transatlantic thing. I mean, those 3 guys that I mentioned are all here in Barcelona. I see them as much as I did, weirdly, before, because they do so much travel. And I think the beauty of being a kind of nimble company and using all those kind of free tools, like communication tools and Skype and things like that, means that you can kind of scale and be in different places, whereas in the olden days, you'd all have to physically be in one place or the other. So we're in San Francisco, and we're also in Seoul in South Korea. We have a team there as well.
So how large is your team in general, the whole team?
So we're now 130.
Wow.
Which is mind-blowing. So I joined 2 years ago, and we were about 30-ish. And I thought that was pretty big.
Nice.
But it's been an amazing journey.
And have you actually bought any advertising?
No. So the one caveat to that is we spent a couple of £100 in over several years, probably on Facebook promoted posts and things like that, to try it out. there's a lot of commentary about it's difficult to get visibility as a brand without doing that. But similarly, we don't find that it has a massive return for us. So we haven't really explored it that deeply, but nothing else at all at the moment. But I think it will be part of our future. I mean, it's part of everyone's future. If you're trying to make it to the next level and be the number one, you start having to use these strategies. But I think the thing is, it's got to be done by people who are great at what they do. So we've just brought in a couple of people from the gaming industry who are totally experts at this to look at some of these questions because they know what works. But I think if you don't know what you're doing, it's the easiest way to lose money fast.
Interesting. So some questions from you folks. Who shall we start with? Questions? Oh, okay. I'll go this way.
Hello.
Hi.
I have two questions, actually. The first one is data-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Are you selling or leveraging your data in any ways?
So no, we have a lot of data, as you can imagine, and we have a data security team who are primarily tasked with just keeping that safe. The most important thing for us is that nothing happens that you don't know about. So we have a data security policy and a privacy policy that kind of set it all out. But basically, at the moment, the only third parties that are involved in anything to do with data are to do with things like Amazon Web Services and how we keep them safe. So at the moment, it's all just in Fort Knox, in Swiftkey HQ. We have a variety of kind of analytics we do on a kind of anonymized big level, so that we can see language trends and what's happening. And again, that's all throughout done with the policy. I mean, the one thing that's been really interesting for us, so we launched just under a year ago Swiftkey Cloud as part of Swiftkey 4.2, and that is kind of a whole nother level of data because we'll store your insights, whereas it was previously on your phone and sort of beam back down to your phone. We store those in the cloud because we were finding it was a user request. Because when you get a new phone, you don't want to start from scratch building your kind of language profile. So that's one of the reasons that we got more into data. But again, it's at the moment totally primarily for user benefit.
Okay. You mentioned security. I download the application, but how do you convince your users that it's safe? Like, how do you do it?
That's a really good question, particularly because on Android, as some of you might know, the moment you download an app, this horrendous pop-up comes up that says, warning, this thing could probably read your credit card details. And it's just like, I'm so, we have to go to such efforts to explain to people that we are not doing that. So there's several things. I mean, one is we are, like all companies, beholden by a lot of laws, and we stick by those. And at the moment, all of our data is in the EU. We're in the EU, and we stick to everything that they ask us to do. We work very hard, again, as I mentioned, with that data team. We've brought in some real experts, but also very few people, even internally, can access any of our data. I can't go and access our data, and even if I could, I can't kind of rifle through a kind of electronic filing cabinet to read things. It's a really important thing for us, and I think that's one reason why we're so indebted to our user community, because we've now built up the heritage over several years of people using us and trusting us and finding that we are what we say we are, and they will then go and reassure others. I mean, there's a few kind of more technical aspects, and probably a lot of you guys will know more about this than I do, but for example, anything that's correctly logged as a password field on the internet, Swiftkey does not learn from that field. So we take every step we can to not kind of monitor things that are your private data, especially in terms of banking and things like that. And it's a daily, ongoing task to be the best that we can be, and that is vital to our future. And also as consumers, I don't want to use something that I don't trust, and we shouldn't expect the public to have a different relationship to their data than I would.
All right. When you say you comply with all kinds of EU regulations, like you just said, does that mean you also comply with subpoenas to see data for individual users?
So to the best of my knowledge, we've never had one. We've never been in that position. We have an in-house lawyer, and that would be a good question for him, which I'm happy to follow up afterwards. I think it's a great question in terms of we've come from this kind of all the NSA revelations, and And I think that kind of shocked quite a lot of the tech community, because there was this whole other level that was perhaps happening that even the companies themselves weren't necessarily aware of. So I'm mindful of that. But to my knowledge, we've not had a subpoena. And I would also wonder whether we would even have data in a form that would be useful to them. I would wonder if we would be able to, it's not quite like Gmail where they have all your messages. We're not quite like that. So I would wonder if we would be of interest. But I think that we would obviously have to comply with any laws that are in place, but otherwise our users always come first. And I would be thinking that we would probably come out and have to say something if we were in that position. But touch wood, we've not been asked.
I've actually got a question for you. You spoke a little bit about the importance of working with the press and working with the media. You guys obviously have a great story to sell, right? Which probably makes things slightly easier. For smaller developers, what are some things, I guess this is a two-part question. One, what's realistic that a smaller or independent developer could set their sights on, as opposed to, a page one story in the Wall Street Journal or something like that? And then two, how can they go about building some of the relationships that can lead to some of these achievable goals?
I think it's a really great question. I think there's still no replacement for the face-to-face opportunity, and I think that's why things like MWC are so effective. There are a lot of journalists here in this space, and often when you get someone's ear, you can have such a more fulfilling conversation than if you're trying to do a kind of clinical email pitch. So where possible, I would just meet as many people as possible and just ask them, what's your area of interest? What do you write about? What do you care about? What are you not seeing enough of in your inbox? And make it about them. I think one of the big difficulties, and I say this as a former journalist as well, is not understanding, the level of workload that they have. And really, you have to make it as easy as possible for them to take your email or your conversation and turn that into a story. So put all the facts up the top. Don't try and cover anything up. You won't have a second chance with them if you try and pull the wool over their eyes. And make it as brief and concise as possible. I think there's also worth thinking about some of the more democratic kind of media out there. So one of the biggest drivers of traffic to us is still Reddit. And those kind of forums are massive for us. And anyone can go on those. And again, you have to build up your kind of reputation as someone with something to say and contribute to that community, as you should. But if you're a developer, and I'm sure many of you are already out in that space, that's a great way of getting that kind of early adopter and getting the industry sites. We are so indebted to the amazing Android blogs like Android Central and all of those who realized early on how great Swiftkey could be for saving time and making life easier. And so we kind of started with that, and then you work your way up to the kind of bigger national publications. But I think the other thing is whether there's kind of a local angle for you. So we're really proud that we've created Jobs in London, and that has enabled us to speak to journalists and business journalists and news journalists that fall outside technology and talk to them about, issues like innovation and skills and those kind of wider conversations. So you might be valuable as a commentator or expert on some of those issues in your area, and that might then allow you to build a relationship that means you can bring your product in. But it's not their job to sell your product. So the less kind of selling you can be about it, the better, I would say.
I've got another one too. Sorry, we're full of questions. I guess because we've known you for such a long time. It's like, yeah, we need to know more. But so you mentioned that you got a lot of feedback from your customers and created Swiftkey Cloud. Mm-hmm. How did you actually get that feedback? Because I think that's an area that a lot of developers struggle with. Is is it just emails? Is it Facebook? It's like, how do we actively engage with our customers to get that kind of good feedback that we need to create a better product?
That's a great question, and it was something that was started at the company before I arrived, and they set up something incredible. They set up things like, we had a VIP forum on our website, which was probably a kind of act of supreme confidence, because at that stage there were no users, let alone VIP users. But since day one, the founders and the early developers knew that we were going to live or die by people testing our product for us, because we're in 62 languages in the app. We don't speak 62 languages. We need people all the time to engage with us, and we owe everything to the community who have been so forthcoming. So people are willing, I think, to share feedback. We've been amazed by that. So we housed 2 kinds of forums for them to do so. One is VIP, which I'd really recommend anyone who's interested in mobile join. You get all of the betas early, you find out first what we're doing, and you also kind of have a hotline back to the developers, because we use that forum to draw up the lists from bug fixes to requests. We have a guy called Evan who works full-time on that forum to feed your views back to the developers, so there's a constant kind of dialogue. We also have just a kind of vote up, vote down feature on the website, so you can come and suggest something, and other people will come and say that they want that too. And then if you've left your email address, we'll notify you if that feature gets worked on. So one of the things people are really excited about is, we've said for a long time that we're working on Japanese and Chinese language input, and that's still in development. But it means that we've been able to collect the names of all the people who care about this thing. So when it's ready, we can go to them and say, we're done, here you are, get it first. And people like that. People like to be part of your conversation. We do a lot on social media, and again, we've kind of integrated Evan, who runs the forum, is on the same team as the people who do the customer support questions and do the Twitter responses, and they are experts in our product. So you're having a real conversation with a real human who can hopefully help you where possible. And we get a lot of suggestions like that, and then there's a big task internally to try and turn them into a hierarchy. And partly that's based on the amount of votes we get. That does count for a lot. We really take notice of that, and we get inspiring suggestions for features that we wouldn't have thought about. And then we also see it as our job to be kind of product leaders, so then we'll throw in some features and things that we think are kind of market leading, and that's how each new release is kind of a mingled outcome of the community and us. But yeah, forums have been really, really invaluable to us. And we're watching a lot of the conversations, like on Reddit and things, and it's quite easy to see what some of the themes are. So we are listening a lot internally. It bothers us when someone's got a bug or something we can't fix. And we don't like to say that we're working on something until we're pretty confident that we can solve it, because we don't want to kind of raise expectations and then dash them. But often we're then beavering away on a whole host of other kind of ideas that we might not have talked about yet, but hopefully we'll have for you soon.
That's great. I've exhausted my questions, I think. Anybody else? Carlo? One up here. Michael?
Yeah, I have a stupid question and a smart question.
Okay.
2 questions. Stupid question is, why do you have a Swiftkey.com web service domain name and a Swiftkey.net for the email service domain name? And the smart question is, who are the competitors of Swiftkey, and if they take a similar approach to user acquisition, or if they don't, why not?
No, they're both good questions. So we don't actually have Swiftkey.com as a web domain. Some guy got there first. So we're all Swiftkey.net. I'm sure that other guy gets a lot of great emails from, potential deals and things. But, that's how the internet works. So Swiftkey.net is where we're at for everything. I'd love it to be .com, but it was not to be. And our rivals in this space, it's a really competitive space, which, to be honest, we love, because I think the biggest problem of all was our competitor was just massive apathy. And I think it's taken quite a long time for mobile manufacturers and consumers to realize that they can have a better keyboard experience and that means something. So we run quite a lot of research and surveys, and people for years have been saying, I love my phone, I hate typing on my phone. And actually we found that people will make a decision between devices on factors like that. They rank that as more important to them than price. And I think that shows that there's actually a real need here. So to be honest, we like all of our kind of rivals in this space because we're all on the same side, which is you do not have to settle for a generic thing. You can have something personalized and tailored to you. There are big names in this space. Swipe do a great job. made gesture input kind of famous. There's some new incumbents like Flexi and Minuum. We're interested in what all those guys are doing. Innovation by them makes us better, and I'd like to think innovation by us makes them better. And it's a big market, and we're proud to be doing so well in it, but there's room for different solutions, and some people just have different taste. So, we like what they're doing. I don't know, actually, what their marketing strategies are with user acquisition and things. They've all done a great job of building a fan base and things, so whatever they're doing is working for them. This is just our way. I think we feel that where possible, when you can have organic growth, it means you've actually made a connection with someone that hasn't been incentivized in any way other than they wanted to try it out. And we found that is what we can translate into a great relationship through the forums, through the communities, through requesting features like Swiftkey Cloud. So that means a lot to us. But yeah, whatever they're doing is working for them, and we'll just do it our way.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on short notice. I thought this was, lots of really, really great information, lots of great notes. Is everybody going to implement a few of these? Oh, one more question. Going to get me my exercise for today. But you and I were still dancing later.
Hey-o.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hey.
I didn't know before about Swiftkey. I have just checked it in the App Store, and I can see that it's freemium. It's a free app.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know what's the business model. How can you build a big company like your one? Maybe only with investors, but in the future, are you going to put there in-app purchases or monetize it, or what's the future of the company?
That's a really good question, and I should have mentioned that really. So Swiftkey on Android is known for being a paid app, and that's the business model. People buy it. There's a free trial for 30 days in the free app store, and then if you want it, you go pay for it. So there's kind of an obvious journey there with the monetization, and that being hugely successful has been great for us and enabled us to invest in other things. We have other revenue from licensing the underlying technology to phone manufacturers. So actually, a lot of you who don't think you're using Swiftkey may actually be interacting with it on a daily basis because we've kind of sold our predictive algorithms and that kind of know-how to phone manufacturers that put a different skin on it. But you're right, with Swiftkey Note, at the moment it's a free app, and that's all it is right now. That was primarily because we wanted to build the user base. We wanted to get out there and build a name for ourselves, and we weren't known there. And that was the easiest way for us to reach as many people as we have. And then now we have that relationship with users, we can think about new products, new spaces, new features, and take it from there. So it was new for us to do a free app. And again, that added to that kind of sense of the unknown when we were doing our launch strategy. We know how to be a paid app on Google Play. Do we know how to be a free app on iOS? And they're very different. But it's a great question, and you're right. At the moment, there is not currently monetization in place for Swiftkey Note.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you. It's been really good fun.